Hello, BookTube. Well, in honor of having made 1,000 videos on BookTube, I did an AMA, a Reddit style Ask Me Anything. I asked for questions, uh, and I saw right away that they started accumulating. So that's fantastic. I didn't think I was that interesting, but there are a lot of new people on the channel, so maybe there will be questions that I've already answered. So I thought I've got the trusty yoga book here. I thought we'd go over them, and I'll make my way through them. Uh, so let me get to the. Oh, okay. There are a few more questions here than I thought. All right, well let's start right in here. Arc R says. Congrats on 1,000 videos. Want to know whether you have kept count of all the books you've read in your life, and would you like to share how many books you have read so far? I have not kept count of how many books I've read in my life. Oh my God. I have not kept count. Let's see here. Angela Werner says, would love some recommendations for thrillers. Well, I don't read a whole lot of thrillers. Most of the ones that I like tend to be off the beaten path of the formula. I mean, all of the current thriller writers who are working today are pleasing. They're all thorough professionals. So I could make a video. Actually, if you haven't seen all of my 1,000 videos, whenever I encounter one of those new modern thriller writers, especially military thrillers. In a mail haul, I'm always the first to squee with joy. Maybe I'll make a video just about contemporary thrillers and list the strengths and weaknesses of each. That would be fun to do. Oh God, I've lost count. Also, Angela Werner asks, also, was the young man who was also a book critic in your videos sometimes? Who was he? Yes, he's also a book critic. He's not as sexy a book critic. Patrick Kenny says, would you consider doing a Penguin Classics library tour? However, that might take 1,000 videos just to get through. Yes, it would. It would, because unlike most other library tour videos, with Penguin Classics, I would have 2 hours of things to say about each and every book. At least 2 hours. That would make for a long series. Well, but I said that we would do it, so we will. I will make a shelf-by-shelf, book-by-book tour of that wall, the wall of penguins. Let's see here. Elizabeth says, what kind of structure or organization do you use in your journaling, if any? Do you go back and reread your journal entries? I do go back and reread my journals every year, at the end of every year, at the crossing of the changing of the old year to the new. I go back and reread them. And they have taken many forms. That's another subject for a whole video. I have used in the past or just ordinary notebooks. Once upon a time, for a few years, I had a guy, an artisan up in, I think, Vermont, who made these gigantic blank page spiral-bound things with, that were 1,000 pages long. They were actually long enough for one whole year. And then I think he stopped making them. I have his information somewhere. I would, for years I would go to Crocs and Botanos or Barnes & Noble and see what they had in the way of leather-bound blank journals. This year and last year I have used a different approach, which is just single sheets of paper. And just let them accumulate and put them in a box when the year is over. And next year, I'm strongly considering going electronic. I strongly am considering buying a thumb drive specifically for the purpose and keeping my journal on that, and loading it with everything else too. My only concern is is rereadability. Can you go back and read a journal that you've done that with? But I think there are some very basic HTML programs out there that will pretty much be readable to any machine in the future. And we're not talking about forever either. They need to be readable for a little while. But I'll do a whole video on journaling. I meant to do that in the summer and I didn't do it. Michael Feeney asks, what are your two most unique experiences working as a bookseller? One positive and one negative. Well, I don't have any that stand out alone, but the positive and negative experiences fell into two categories. They were very predictably fell into two categories. The positive experiences, no matter how much I loved my coworkers, and I did. I'm friends with a lot of coworkers now that a lot of people now who our friendship began when we were coworkers. And much as I love that, for me, by far, the best part was the customers. Forging a relationship with them, joking with them, recommending books to them, and getting recommendations from them. They were by far the best part of every bookstore that I worked at, and people noticed. People who I worked with noticed that it was my specialty, that I really liked it, and that customers seemed to like it. That was really, really nice. And the negative part, the worst part of working in bookstores was always the same, and it was always management. You'd get one or two good managers that everybody liked and that understood that the fact that they're getting 27 cents more an hour at a retail mall bookstore doesn't mean that they are God Emperor of Doom. But most of the time, you'd get one or two exceptions that everybody liked, but most of the time you got mall cops, you got airport security agents, you got people who were unqualified to hack it in the worlds that they actually aspire to, and so they go into retail management and get a tiny smidgen of power over a tiny group of other people and immediately start abusing it. I had endless tussles with such people, especially towards the end of my bookselling career, when some new manager would come on board and say, and I had this happen to me, would walk over to where I was talking to a customer, wait until I was finished impatiently, so that both the customer and I noticed there was someone standing there waiting like a rude 4-year-old, and then say, Steve, go over there and fix that. And I would turn to them, and I would smile, and I would say, that's not at all how you talk to someone else. I'm 3 times your age. You don't order me to do something. and it would 9 times out of 10 lead to either an embarrassed look on their face and a hasty rephrasing of the question, or a confrontation. Because these, see, as you can tell, it's getting me worked up now. Management was always the worst part of working in retail bookselling. And it's the part that I don't miss. I miss the customers. I really do. In fact, a couple of old cronies from the bookstore years have pointed out that might be the itch I'm scratching with BookTube. I don't know. Well, that's interesting to think about. And Michael Feeney also asked, he seconds I guess there are other questions about this, great sci-fi and fantasy recommendations. Well, okay. I can certainly make great science fiction and fantasy recommendations, but the thing is, my recommendations usually don't satisfy people, because they usually want recommendations of things they haven't heard of before. And that's just fine if you've read the things you have heard of before. But if you ask, 10 well-read people for a really good science fiction or fantasy recommendation, and they all say the same thing, it's because you should read that book. It's not because they don't have any imagination. So if you haven't read those books, then that's. Well, we'll get to it. It sounds like there are other requests for recommendations. So let's see here. Huddle Guts says, on the topic of your profligacy in all things book, I wonder if you ever scroll through all these lists of books you must read before you die, books everybody should read, etc., and how you approach them. With triumph, smug satisfaction, a red pen for edits. Are there any you haven't read all of? I don't do it. I hope I don't do it with smug satisfaction. I think those lists are very helpful. And those books, the 1001 books you must read before you die, is very helpful. But I have usually read all the books on the list, unless the author of the list is intentionally going for books that are obscure. And that always bugs me. When somebody makes a list, here are the 10 books you absolutely have to read in order to be well read, and they intentionally put a couple of things on there that they're sure no one's ever heard of. Well, okay, you don't have to read those in order to be well read, and that bugs me because such lists gather attention, and they therefore impose upon you a certain responsibility. And if you use it to show off, but I love those lists at the end of every year. I absolutely love them. And as I've mentioned on a couple of videos lately, I make one of my own, the greatest and biggest and most interesting and most opinionated one of them all on my intergalactically famous book blog, Steve Reads. That list will go up it'll start going up in December, genre by genre, list by list, leading all the way to the climactic final four. The best fiction, the best nonfiction, and the worst fiction, and the worst nonfiction. Such a fun time to do. Lara Croft says, what are the best books about the Russian Revolution that were published this year? Well, there were a pile of them, a whole bookcase full of books on the Russian Revolution, every aspect of it. And the best one, in this particular instance, the best one is going to be a recommendation that isn't going to do a lot of people a lot of good, since it's not something a lot of people are going to read. And it's Yuri Slezkin's The House of Government. And the reason it's for me, it's the most memorable. It's stuck with me in every detail, and it's also the most powerful. And the reason why that isn't a great recommendation in this case is because it's 1,200 pages long. And it goes into mind-boggling detail about the inhabitants of one apartment complex in Moscow. So that's a tough sell. I almost don't want to recommend it because it'll lead to some people going out and getting it from the library, and it's not a work of nonfiction that is accessible to people who don't read a lot of nonfiction. So for them, I'd recommend like Anne Applebaum's Red Famine, about Stalin's intentional imposition of starvation on Ukraine, is an amazing book. It's just one small sliver of the subject, but it's an amazing book. And there are a bunch of others. I've done a bunch of reviews of them over the year. I thought I would get sick of them. Victor Sebastian's book on Lenin is fantastic. If I remember, I'll put links to some of my reviews of some of the Russian books from 2017 down below, because it's been a fruitful year. Let's see here. Gemma O'Brien says, let's see here. Which books inspired Harry Potter? Well, the whole list of fantasy from when J.K. Rowling was growing up that starred a young boy who seemed to be nothing and was hated by his caregivers, who turned out to be the chosen one. It's an extremely common idea. Will we see the return of Last Week in BookTube? Yes, we will see the return of Last Week in BookTube. For those of you who might be new to the channel, and if you would have missed it completely, I used to do a regular feature on this channel called Last Week in BookTube, where I looked back at some of the videos that I watched and just talk about them. And people liked it. Viewers liked it. And I loved doing it. And for some reason, I stopped doing it. And I never got back into the momentum of it. I will correct that. If not in the remainder of 2017, then certainly in 2018. Extra question. Milo would like to know, in case you two were to meet, would you let him chew on your shoelaces? Milo is her new little pet. And I would let Milo chew on my face, not my shoelaces. Pets like flesh if they can get it. I know that for a fact in the last week. Donna Kirby says, let's see here. I have been following you for about 3 years now, but over the course of those years, you are such a good video. Oh, it's no question. It's just a thank you. Well, thank you. Actually, quite a few of these, it looks like, are prefacing their questions with thanks. And my God, I certainly return the favor. This has been an enormous pleasure for me, these 1,000 videos. And in addition to being a pleasure, it's also a couple of times been a genuine help, which I did not foresee when I started doing this. Let's see here, though. Kino H says, what do you think of Anthony Burgess? And is there a good book about world history that you would recommend for someone who does not read history but would like to, I think Burgess is a genius. I think he's fantastic. I've read almost everything that he's written, and I have a great many of his books I have reread with great profit over the years. I wish that he were more in currency. I think it's the University of Cambridge Press has embarked on a mad quest to do pretty hardcover reprints of everything that he did. I think they will probably just chicken out and do all the novels only and not any of the nonfiction. But for me, I mean, I love Earthly Powers. Earthly Powers is a great novel, but I also love his nonfiction. The 2 volumes of his memoir, the collection of his book reviews, his book on Shakespeare. I think he's fantastic. And as for a good book about world history, well, there's an author named Roberts who has an absolutely standard world history. You would have seen it on Richardson Reed's. I'm not 100% sure, but considering that Richardson Reed seems to have a hardcover copy of every book ever printed, I'm sure that he does have a history of Roberts' History of the World. And it's a good one to start with. He's got a good, clean, engaging prose style. A little bit on the forensic side, but well worth your time. Although I don't, keep in mind, I don't advocate that. If you're interested in, what is it here, who does not read history but would like to, it's the natural impulse in a circumstance like that to think, well, I don't usually read history, but I'd like to. So, of course, the natural place to start is with a world history. I'll start with a big picture, and then I'll go small. I don't advocate that. It's almost impossible to write a world history that is interesting from start to finish. Roberts doesn't do it. I don't know of anybody who does. My strong advice when wanting to get into reading history is to start small and go big. That's the way to do it, not the other way around, not the natural, intuitive way. Start with a small subject. One person, one country, one time period, one battle, one phenomenon that interests you. And learn everything you can about that one thing, and then branch out. Then let the waves go out from there. That, over the course of my 28 years of instructing people on how to learn to love reading history, that has always worked, and the other way has not. But anyway, let's see here. Sue Surfs says, I've always been curious about the orange octopus. Why is it always there? Oh well, it's a very, very sad story. So I don't want to gloom up the proceedings. But it was a gift, and it was given to me. It was given to me with the request that she appear in videos. So here she is. What kind of books get to be displayed on the fireplace mantle? Well, right now it's Everyman Library hardcover classics, but it changes all the time. It's a display space, so it changes all the time depending on what doesn't fit anywhere else. Best biography of an extraordinary woman. That's a huge subject. The 2 that come right to mind are both written by their subjects. Oh well, the Downing Street years, Margaret Thatcher's memoir of her time in power in Britain, is fantastic. It doesn't read like a political memoir at all. It's written under her name. It wasn't written by her, but she was more involved in its production than the press generally gave her credit. And it's it's thrilling. It reads like a political thriller. And also West with the Night by Bella Markham, which was written by her and is beautiful. Just a fantastic book. And both are, relatively readily available in used bookstores, and both at libraries, every library. Why are beagles special? I don't know. I don't have any idea. They are. They know it, and I know it. But I don't know why. I've never known why. What do you usually cook at home? Well, my repertoire is fairly limited. Potatoes. Let's see here. What are we doing here for time? Oh, God, we're at 20 minutes and we're not... Oh, we might be able to finish. We'll put the spurs to this thing and see if we can get it done in one video. Cameron, whose channel is great. I'm sure you all subscribe already, but if you don't, you should. My question is, how were you introduced to reading, and when did you know you wanted a career in the world of books? I was introduced to reading by one particular teacher, one great teacher, who taught me that books weren't just items of contempt or boredom, that they were worlds of adventure. And he was right, and I owe him more than I can ever repay. When did I know that I wanted a career in the world of books is, I don't know that I ever thought that there would be a career. But I knew that I wanted to concentrate on it years and years and years and years ago when I was writing political opinion pieces for a newspaper. And the arts editor became a friend of mine. And I was reading. I wasn't just reading politics books. I was reading tons of things. And I suggested maybe occasionally giving him a book review. And he said yes, and I loved it. I loved the experience of it. I loved the kind of thinking that it involves, and I loved the response from the audience, my readers. So I just kept doing it. And then I stopped for stupid reasons and went into retail bookselling for a quarter of a century. And now I'm back into book reviewing. Jordan S. asks, what would be your recommendation for highly intelligent science fiction novel? Like I said, they're the great books of the field. I would recommend. I would certainly recommend Dune by Frank Herbert, and Startide Rising by David Brin, The Fire Upon the Deep by Verna Vinge. These really things that make the top 10 list of almost any science fiction list. Also, a slightly, maybe one that wouldn't make those lists would be Dying Inside by Robert Silverberg, which has no lasers, no aliens, no spaceships, but is an amazing novel. And also Ursula Le Guin, especially, in my opinion, The Lathe of Heaven, which a slim novel of hers that I just love. But there's it would be a much longer list. We Need Honey says, what are some of the non-fiction books about dogs that you would recommend as must-reads? Oh, wow, there's quite a few. James Serpil edited a book called The Domestic Dog that, if you want, approaching the subject from a scientific standpoint, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. The Coppingers, I think they're a husband and wife team, they did a book called What is the Dog? They've done a lifetime of research on dogs, and their book, What is the Dog, was really, really good. There's an author named Pierce who wrote Run, Spot, Run for a really thought-provoking book on dogs from the other side of the equation. This author says that we do dogs a disservice by keeping them as pets, that we stunt them and blunt them, and it's an examination of the whole concept of owning dogs as pets that I didn't agree with a single word of it, but I loved reading it. I loved the way it made me think. That was fantastic. And My Life in Dogs by Gary Paulson, in which chapter by chapter he goes through the dogs of his life, and it's heartbreaking and amazingly good and uplifting in a good way. And of course, the dog book that I recommend the most is the hardest to read. It's the most beautifully written. It's Rick Bass's book, Coulter, about one particular dog that he owned. And, oh my, what a book. What a book. Let's see here. Mike Joyce says, do you have any recommendation for history surrounding the Irish Revolution and Civil War? I know that he gets derided a lot, but I would say Tim Pat Coogan as a place to start. Pick one of his books. He's got a very engageable reading style, and I've never really understood the derision that sometimes accompanies people, that they sometimes load on him. I've never really understood it. He seems like a perfectly fine popular historian to me. So I recommend him. He has a shelf of books on the subject. Let's see here. Elizabeth's Spooky House of Books says, of all the nonfiction you read, do you have an all-time favorite and why? Oh my God. That's not really how it works. One all-time favorite work of nonfiction? No. No. I couldn't even begin to do that. No. Some of the ones that I've spent a lot of time with are, for instance, The City of God by St. Augustine. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, by Edward Gibbon, the big histories of the 19th century, where that to me are some of the pinnacles of the combination of wordcraft and scholarship. But it goes on and on. So that doesn't touch biography or science or no. It's too big a question. My favorite of all time. There's no way that I could do it. Nanette McCall says, my question is book related. I have been searching for a good biography of Eva Peron. Does one exist? Not that I've ever read. Gail Dowdy says, how long and what subjects did you teach? I taught for a long time on and off, and the subjects were totally random. The thing that I taught the most was writing, creative writing. But I was ready to teach on almost anything. One time, a friend of mine called me up and said, in a panic, he had just got a job as a TA for an entry-level 101 class on Greek mythology, and walked out into the auditorium that he was going to be handling duties for, and it was this gigantic thing with 1,000 students sitting with him at the bottom of the well, and it froze him solid, froze him like ice. And he asked if I could do it, and he called me because he knew A, I don't have any trouble speaking in public, and B, I probably don't need time to prepare on the subject of Greek mythology. He was right on both counts. I had a ball. Let's see here. Okay, PRCZEK02, no idea how to pronounce that, says, what are the 3 books that come to your mind that you have read in 2017 so far that really stuck out with you for whatever reason? Also, will there be a recommendation video of books worth giving someone else as Christmas presents? Have you thought of making a top 2017 book releases? As a matter of fact, I have, yes. I do that every year at my intergalactically famous book blog, Steve Reads. I do best books of the year. But for the longest time, for years and years there, I did that list at the very end of the year. Until Deb pointed out to me that if I did it earlier in the year, if I did it early in December instead of late in December, it might actually be of use to people who were looking for recommendations for buying gifts. So then I moved it. And it starts in December. Let's see here. Oh, God. Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no. Oh, no, 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 no. There are way more questions than I thought. I'm going to wrap this up and make a part 2. Sorry, BookTube. I'll see you in a minute.